and welcome to In the Rising podcast. My name is Bettina, and this is the platform I've chosen to talk about living a life that's in alignment with your hopes, your dreams, where your compass is basically facing north. Walking away from that shame-blame game that does so little. In fact, it does nothing for your life, except sometimes wake you up enough to realize there needs to be a change. And sometimes with that change, we realize that we want to write about it. And after we've written about it in our journal, we may want to write a book and we may want to publish it. And my guest today is Lisa Santiago McNeill, who helps women do just that thing. Lisa Santiago McNeill is my guest today on In the Rising podcast, and I am thoroughly excited to meet her and for you to listen to her. She is really a woman who stands in her truth and empowered to empower. So welcome to my podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Bettina. I appreciate it.
So you have a phenomenal story. Like, you know, you're helping other women live their truth. And one of those ways is you're helping, and you have listed here 90 people to become authors, to create a piece of masterpiece out there. Yeah. Go a little bit into where did this come from?
Absolutely. So often we go through areas of our journey in life and we wonder why do we have to deal with this? Why do we have to go through this? And sometimes we get to a point, particularly myself, where the struggle is just so impactful. You're like, who is supposed to help me? Where are the people that are supposed to help me? And why aren't they helping me? And oftentimes, at least for me, I got through a season of being isolated. I got through a season where I was tossed around from house to house as a child. And then coming out of that, I ran away at 13 because I couldn't deal with the abuse that was going on where I was at. So in that, I'm like, what is this? What is this? Where is my help? Where is God? That was even a question, as a matter of fact, not so much where is God, because I feel like I kind of always knew that there was God, but then I felt like, well, goodness, if this is with God, I don't need it. I'd rather be done with it. And then, going on and making some choices just to survive in that area. You're a 13-year-old girl, you're living in New York, you're living on your own, trying to figure out how to pay bills, how to keep your head above water, how to be safe. I made some choices that I probably wish I didn't have to, some really unsavory choices. And again, go back to that, why me? Why do I have to be in this? Why do I have to deal with this? And where is my help? Then you fast forward to realizing that there was something in me that was being developed, a resilience, a tenacity, also a compassion. And all of those things were being created and learned, if you will, by a class that I would have never signed up to take, right? I would have never enrolled in that class, honey. But I look back on it now and know that some of those muscles that needed to be created were amazing. Some of the things that I learned how to do were amazing. And I also realized that if I had not gone through them, I would not have developed them. And so I began the journey helping people to make sense of those tough places in their lives and helping them to extract those amazing anointings, I'll call them, those skills, gifts, and talents that they would have either not had or not realized without some help and support. And it started out as life coaching. And one of the certifications that I went through for my life coaching certification as a master trainer was to gain credibility and to become a subject matter expert in my field, which is overcoming childhood trauma and moving yourself into your next best self, right? So part of that journey included a spiritual autobiography, which is telling your truth and extracting the real truth from it. And in that process, I had written my book. And then my coach says at the time, as I'm going through these certifications, which is great. Well, you can get it if you can get it published by XYZ date, I'll market it for you. I'll do this, I'll do that, and whatever. And if you don't know how to publish it, you can use my resources. It'll only cost between $5,000 and $10,000 only, right? I didn't have $5,000 or $10,000 at that time. I had purpose and passion, but I didn't have the finances at that time. But I had to get it done by that deadline because I wanted it to be marketed. I wanted to become bestseller. I wanted, the help and that purpose, that credibility for people who have been hurting the way that I had hurt. I wanted them to be able to find me. And so I learned, I studied, I read, I researched, and I published my book. And it was wonderful. It became a bestseller on Amazon. Yay! It had gotten a lot of reach. But the first thing people said to me, especially the close people said to me, was great. Congratulations on your book. The second thing was, can you help me write my book? Right? So after realizing that not only could I help them to extract their story in a methodological way that will not only give them the benefit of sharing it, because sometimes sharing lightens the burden of that story, but also showing them how to extract the wisdom in that story so that potentially someone who is going through the same or similar circumstance can find their help in it and get through it more quickly than they could have on their own. And so I helped one, I helped another, and now fast forward, we're actually at about 103 now. I think you said 90 something, but we're actually at 103 now. I've had a couple of group classes since then. I converted from one-on-one. I still have some one-on-one clients, but to some group processes, because I really believe that when we understand what we went through and learn what we learned, and then show someone else how to do it quicker, faster, easier, we're not only fulfilling our purpose, but we're helping someone to get the help that they need. And so that process has been able to do that.
And that's phenomenal because, for one, so far it's just the authorship. We're going to dig deeper in a little bit on other topics you discussed, but and as an author, I did some research, and it's, I think 90 or 95% of the public, when you talk to them, they're like, I want to write a book.
Yes.
Only 3% actually write it. Only 1% or so. And I may be off on my stats, but it's tiny, actually publish it.
Yes.
So regardless of, and that's wonderful if it's bestseller or it's not, but that shows so much perseverance about someone doing it. And when you have the help, you go from a 1% to a much higher percentage. That's honorable what you're doing.
Yes. Praise God. You really do. Praise God. Get to help impact lives. I wonder, because those stats are they're dead on. I've heard them before as well, but I can't remember what year they're from, because I wonder if in the past 10 years, more people have actually realized their dream of publishing, because it's become a lot more accessible. But it certainly is a common thread, particularly amongst those who have overcome something in their lives and gone on to do something greater than even they thought was in them. Yeah.
Yeah. And on that point, you were a runaway at 13 because of childhood abuse.
Yeah.
I said this the other day, and I like my little saying that some of us deserve a gold medal for making it through our childhood because of the traumas that happened. And for you to 13 to have the mindset, I'm going to make it on my own, that must be better than this. Like, where did you go? How did you live? How did you survive?
Oh my goodness. That is woo. Well, I actually cover a little bit of it in my book, Discovering Your Why, A Journey to Wholeness. But at 13, when I ran away, I came into the realization at that point, it was almost like I came into adulthood at that moment. And my abuser still had access to the home. He was still in and out of the home. And I came to a place that, I appreciated the people that had raised me up to that point. And that was what was keeping me from retaliating at that time to this particular individual, but that I didn't think I could keep that anger, that unforgiveness that hadn't yet been processed at that time. I didn't think I could keep that in control. I really felt raging angry. I felt like I would kill him. And I didn't want the responsibility of my lashing out, although he deserved it, to fall on my caregivers. I just didn't want that. And one thing that always stayed ingrained in my mind, and this is probably crazy, but it's one of those things, is that if you think you can do it better, you should go off and do it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but that was what I felt like. I remember my grandmother saying at 16, you should move out now. You should move out now. She said this to one of my uncles. You should move out now while you know everything, right? Because these are my rules. And while you're in my house, you follow my rules. So at 13, I think there was some convolution in there with that. Also the survival instinct and wanting to get out. So I ran away. And at that time, I lived from house to house, from couch to couch, and then realized that that men were attracted to me, and they would pay me for my attractiveness, right? So there were some seasons where either I was just taken care of by men, or I was abusing myself and taking their money, or however the case was. I was going through those journeys, and that was actually where, when I go back in my mind, where the stories of overcoming and the importance of empowerment through economic independence came from, right? Because my lack of empowerment was because I didn't have funding. If I had money to pay my bills, I wouldn't have to let somebody sleep with me. I wouldn't have to let somebody do whatever they wanted with me, or stay at their house, to eat their food, to whatever the case was. I didn't have any money. And at that age, 13 through 16, in New York, there was not a lot of resources for girls that were not pregnant or had children. I don't know if those things had changed, but I was afraid, that they would send me back to where I had already left. I didn't want to go back there. And there were no other resources. So I couldn't go to like the police or foster care or anything like that, or whatever, because they would send me back. They would send me back, and I didn't want to be back there. And I didn't have a child or anything. I wasn't pregnant at the time or anything like that. So there weren't any resources available. So I had to figure out, and the easiest way to figure it out was on my back, unfortunately, for a season. I stayed in school, actually. I stayed in school, and I actually started working and paying tuition. I was in a Catholic school at the time, and I stayed in school. They gave me a scholarship, I was on like a partial scholarship, and I stayed in school up until the 10th grade. And and I was an AB honor roll, even homeless, AB honor rolls up until the 10th grade. I was working full time at Burger King at night. So I worked from 4 to midnight at Burger King, and I was at school from 7 to 2 each day in high school. And I did my homework on the train on the way back and forth to school, and I slept whatever other time there was after that, fixing and making it work. But then I got calculus. And calculus, it was never explained to me like what it was connected to. So they're teaching me something. I'm trying to survive on the streets. I'm trying to fight for my life and my job and make money and make hustles and make whatever I could, And calculus just didn't seem like it made any sense at all. At that time, I was trying to figure out how to get a raise at Burger King. I wanted to make more money so that I could do less hustling and figure out what I was going to do in my life. And it didn't come. So I decided that I was going to quit. And that was in the 10th grade. I finally decided. So for about 2 years, I was in the street and still going to school. And then in the 10th grade, I decided I was going to quit. And I decided that traditional high school was not for me. It just didn't make any sense. And I went to business school. And I actually took the test for business school. They didn't require a high school diploma or GED, or they didn't ask for one. I don't know which,
Yeah.
but I took the entrance exam and I passed it. So I went in and got my associate's degree in business administration and management, which made a lot more sense, and it gave me exponentially better resources for survival. I was able to learn how to type. I learned computers. I realized that I had a knack for certain things that people were willing to pay for. And so I'm grateful. That decision was the best decision that I could have made. Was that at that time it was that I needed something that would help me now, not 4 years, 8 years down the line or whatever. And so with that degree, I still wasn't on the straight and narrow, but at least I was doing white collar crime instead of instead of having to be just in such unsavory conditions, but it was a tough season to really go through, to have to make that transition, because I just couldn't live. I couldn't live on what I was earning, and I was not able to I wasn't going to go back home. I had already been, I don't think I started at the beginning, but I wasn't raised by my mom. So I had already been handed around from family to family to family. And I was being raised by my mother's mother's father's mother. So my great great grandmother. And that was why there was abuse in the home. She wasn't physically able to keep me safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you made lots of points, but you talk about the one thing, especially as women, especially when you've gone through trauma, there is a link between being financially independent
Absolutely.
and moving forward and holding on to that financial independence, keeping it away from you, can really, it puts you in this subjugate position where you have to tolerate, you have to get by. And that's a huge point to that. And so, and especially, we say it's real nice to have a conversation over coffee about, well, is everything that we're teaching kids really valuable? And we think about kids who have a safe home. It may be divorced or maybe this, but, truly, my 1 year of homeschool last year made me really aware he doesn't need half this stuff, and I have 2 master's degrees and I've never used this stuff. So, and so, so with business school, you went on then to work to IBM. And how did you finally get a grasp on your financial independence?
So, so I was financially independent, but not necessarily, I guess the only way I can say it's not necessarily legally so. So I transitioned to the legal area because I had to make that transition because I'm too cute for jail, honey. I just realized, you're too cute for jail. There's too many women that don't need to be there, right? So becoming fiscally responsible, transitioned to Charlotte, North Carolina from New York. I'm originally a New Yorker. I moved to Charlotte just with a U-Haul and all the money that I could keep from whatever rent and whatever. I didn't pay any bills for a year. And I just hoarded every dollar I could find for a year. I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. I went to sign up and apply for my first job. And it was administrative, obviously, because I had an associate, so reception or whatever. And they never asked if I had a high school diploma. That's the one thing I want to tell kids. You need to get your high school diploma. At the very least, you move on from there. You can accomplish no matter what, but that's really a foundation. But they never asked. They asked for highest grade completed. And I had an associate's degree. So I said 14. So they assumed that in order to get to 14, you had to do 9, 10, 11, and 12. That is none of my business what you assume. But thankfully, that transition gave me the grounding that I needed. That was an administrative and insurance. And then I got married. And the deal that I had made with my husband at the time was that whichever one of us, when I first moved to Charlotte, our agreement was whichever one of us got a job first, the other one would go to school. Mm-hmm. And then when they graduated, the opposite would go to school. So as soon as we got to Charlotte, I got the job first and he went to school. I studied alongside him because we were both going in the computer field. I studied alongside him. I wanted sort of a jump start, if you will, a head start for when it was my turn. And when he graduated, he went on his first job. It's nothing but God that orchestrates our steps. And I'm grateful for that. He definitely ordered our steps. But he went on the job interview and he told them that he didn't want the job. He was considerably a big guy at the time. And they had cubicles and he just couldn't imagine working in a cubicle at that time. And he told them he didn't want it. He said, but my wife can do all of this work. Now, I didn't have the degrees and I hadn't been to school yet for any of that yet, other than helping him through school and using some of the things that I was learning there and applying them at my job, which was kind of keeping me ahead of the game, you know. And so when I went on that interview, the gentleman that interviewed me, and I remember him to this day because God used him mightily in that moment, he almost ignored me the entire time. He talked on his phone. He looked at his computer during the interview. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, what am I even here for? This man doesn't care. I'm not qualified in my mind. I'm hearing I'm not qualified for this and all of these things. And then suddenly he said, he just turned to me suddenly. He says, why do you think you should get this job? And in that moment, I think I had already realized that whether I get the job now or later will determine what he gets to pay for me. Mm-hmm. So if he gets me now, then he'll get a considerable discount as to, you know, all the things that I know versus what he will have to pay after I am, you know, certified and go through all of these training classes and everything else. And I explained to him what I was already doing at my insurance company that I was, you know, the administrative assistant for. And he was just writing the whole time. He was just, he's writing. And then he turned the paper around at the end of that conversation and he says, go home and type this up, because my resume was administrative. It wasn't technical at that time at all, but I had done some technical things at the job. And obviously I had helped my husband to graduate by helping to train him at that time. And so he typed up, he hand wrote my new resume as he would like it. He said, go home, take this home, type it, bring it back tomorrow, and will it was 40. I was making 22 at the time. Will 40,000 to start work for you? And I'm like, yeah. That'll work just fine. So like I had a $20,000 a year raise in one sitting. And then within, it was what do you call those? Temp to hire positions. So within 60 days, they hired me on permanently for another 15,000 more a year. And in that process, these were doors that God was opening. Honestly, It was opening because IBM went on to pay for my certifications. They went on to pay for my training. I got in-house certifications, all of these things that I didn't have to pay for in my school. So those student loans don't live over my head. And then they opened my doors to help so many families. I started out helping families because they advocated on volunteerism. And so I would have time to take off and, you know, go to the schools and be a school parent and help with the children and all of those things. And actually ultimately ended up creating a 6-week summer program for underprivileged children that I would not have been able to do I would not have had the opportunity to do at a traditional or or regular job, and still keep my job and all of that. And it was a blessing. All of it was a blessing. God just kept opening doors and opening doors until he decided that he was done. And that was when the transition came for me to go to full-time faith work. I guess you could call it full-time faith work. Was when I heard from God, when will you trust me?
Mm-hmm.
And I have been thinking, prayerfully, my entire life was a faith walk. I had to trust God for food, clothing, shelter, protection, all of these things forever, for like as long as I can believe. And so when I heard, when will you trust me? I was like, God, I'm trusting you. I always trust you. And he says, no, you're trusted in the 1st and the 15th.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, what do you mean? It was time to walk away. He had prepared me. He had ordered my steps. He had allowed me to learn what I needed to learn. And then it was time for me to really trust that the things that he had instilled in me were going to be able to be used for the rest of my journey. And entrepreneurship started out simply as helping. It started out really helping children, like I said, helping children, because that was where my heart was. But I realized that so many of the children's issues were really not the children's issues. There were their mother's issues. There were their father's issues. There were their household issues. And that if we could just help to change some of the dynamic that was going on at home, we could actually change the impact into the lives of those children. And they would not only be more stable, but they would also be more inspired.
Mm-hmm.
Those children would become more inspired. And so helping the children led me to helping the mothers. And myself and a girlfriend of mine, started a program called The Road to Success for You, which is, we just stood in like a proxy for some of the women whose children were having issues in schools that couldn't make it to school. They couldn't get to the school. Like now we do Zoom everything, but there was a need for Zoom before we started using Zoom. These moms, if you've got PTO time that you can only take for X, Y, and Z, as they call it, but now you've got to come in and meet with your child's school. You got parent-teacher nights. You've got things that you're never going to be able to get off of your schedule and have sick time for when you need it. It's just not going to happen. So we would stand in for those parents. So if little Johnny got a note that he had to, he had to bring his mom to school, we would get mom's proxy. And we started out in our church, obviously. We would get mom's proxy and we would go to school as mom. We're not mom. We would tell them, well, I'm not such and such as mom, but I'm his mom's proxy. Tell us what's going on. It got to the point where moms that we didn't even know were asking us to be their proxy. Maybe they didn't have a car. Maybe they didn't have a ride there. They couldn't get there, or they were working during those hours. It was necessary to support that child. But what we found out after we went and talked to the teacher and, oh, Johnny's acting out, or he's sleeping in class, or he's doing whatever. And then you go to the house, because we would then take the message back to mom at her convenience to her house. So we're going to go sit down with you, tell you what the teacher's issues are, what little Johnny is getting written up for. You have to build a rapport with mom. Because if you walk in there saying, and this is wrong with him, and this is wrong with him, and this is wrong with him, you get a wall. So we'll walk in and we'll build relationships with those moms, and we will realize that sometimes they couldn't do better. Now, I'm not saying that there's not some people that are just not doing because they don't feel like it. But if you've got a single parent working 2 jobs and they have 3 children and they're trying their best, then you've got to be the hand extended, and you don't need to be holding a belt or a staff. You need to be extending with love. And we will help them to see that maybe instead of that second job, you could do a part-time business with the works of something that you love. something that you love. We will help them to see what they love. You can walk into anybody's home and find an area that brings them joy. You can just look around and see it. I don't care if it's a dirty house. I don't care if it's a impoverished house. I don't care what it is. You can see an area, whether it's, they have a Bible study corner, whether they have a beautiful table setting, whether you smell cookies, whatever it is, you can find something that brings them joy. And we will help them to see that that thing that brings you joy could also bring you provision. And then show them how to turn that provision, which is where I transitioned to in publishing and in business coaching, was now you know what's in your hand. Let's show you how to let your gifts make room for you. Right. And it has really been a labor of love.
And that is on so many levels as a mom too. I cooperate, I co-parent, but I'm still alone in this house.
Yes.
And it's still my yard and my this and working 2 jobs that sometimes I don't have any more hands, and I'm not impoverished. I am beyond blessed. I can do a podcast. So, I am in that, but the exhaustion is something I relate to. And you're right, to extend a hand is not necessarily a handout. It is extension of love instead of the staff. And turning your passion into provision, offering a different mindset, a different view, and an opportunity out of that generational space.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's critical. One of my favorite, I want to call it a turnaround story, was the son was acting out in this particular relationship. The son was acting out. He was acting out in school. And when I went home to the mother, she was very defensive. Like she was ready to defend why he's acting out, right? But I immediately noticed, going back to the smell, maybe I just like yummy things to eat, but I immediately noticed that she had this, it was an aroma in her house. She was cooking. It was beautiful. It was delicious. I could smell it. And so I changed the subject to that. We started talking about the things that she likes to do. And she says, well, I really like to cook and bake. And the thing was, she was doing these things in a very small, narrow period of time, and she wasn't including her children. And she didn't even know that her son and then the rest of her children had never seen her joyfully doing something that she loved. And when she started setting aside time to joyfully do something that she loved, then involving the kids in it, they all began to see, wow, mom can do this, mom can do that, but we can do that too. They began to be inspired. Everyone began to be inspired. And actually, the son ended up taking over the cooking and the baking particularly, and began to sell his cookies. And so we started talking about that, like, oh, well, that's cute. That's not cute. That is entrepreneurial. That is resourceful. Let's show him how to do this properly. And let's reward him for putting that passion forward. And he ultimately was able to share his story, share his cakes and his cookies with his neighborhood and then with the neighbors, and then continuing to grow. And now is really enterprising young man. He's beginning to think, okay, what else can I do? I can set up a YouTube channel. I can drive traffic through my Instagram. I can do all of these things that people are just playing around with. I can do them intentionally. And I can change not just my life, but my family's life.
Yes. Wow. What a great story. Thank you for sharing that story. And what I like to, because I love to talk about how we rise up. And my podcast is In the Rising, right? Where do you see yourself still rising up to? What plans are brewing for you, Lisa?
Absolutely. So I am really expanding, extending my empowerment publishing and multimedia to include more multimedia, giving platforms for these stories of overcoming, giving platforms, of course, not just to my authors, but to those that are bringing stories of perseverance and overcoming, not just in the podcast, but we do video podcasting. We actually are working on our magazine. We're doing lots of things to extend the reach. So think Oprah Winfrey and then 10X her.
I love that. And you know what is really wonderful is that when you said Oprah, that would automatically stop a lot of people from moving forward. They're like, oh, it's all done, but it's not done. There's still so much room for so many others because there are so many people that only relate to certain people. And you're going to be one of those people that they relate to. And phenomenal work that you're doing. Why don't you give a brief synopsis of all the different ways someone can get in touch with you, follow you, learn from you, build with you?
Absolutely. The easiest way to connect with me and to find out everything that's going on in my circle, we call it the Empowerment Circle, is to go to IamLisaSantiago.com. IamLisaSantiago.com. If you want to connect with me on a more personal level, you can connect with me on Facebook and Instagram. It's Lisa Santiago McNeill. Because evidently somebody decided that they wanted to be me and they stole my name. So I had to add my husband's name to the end to make sure that you got the right one. So it's Lisa Santiago McNeill on Facebook and Instagram. On LinkedIn, it's I Am Lisa Santiago. And really just continuing to be accessible is what I am still grateful for. You can schedule time if you're having trouble identifying what your purpose and calling is. You can actually schedule a brief consultation and we can talk about it for a couple of minutes and see if I'm a good fit to help you to flesh it out. And if it's not me personally, those in my network who I have coached to their own individual coaching levels can help. And I am always willing to refer someone to someone that can help them better, because every client is a success story when you work with the right client.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so very much for this time. I'm so thankful, Lisa. What I will do, you'll hear from me. I would say give me a week and a half. Last week was ridiculous with trying to get my son in school. Normally every week after the podcast, I work on producing them and then let you know when they're scheduled. Okay. Because last week and I have to go out of town next week, give me at least 2 weeks to get them all processed. And then I'm going to tell you, most likely your and my time is going to be a 2-part series. So I'll put it out on 2 Tuesdays. Okay. And so just in general, I do have a podcast on something internet radio called Helium Network. So it has a different reach as well. So I'm a little behind because of life with Facebook and Instagram. It's getting there, but I've really been blessed with having wonderful people to talk to. So thank you so much. And thank you for being such a blessing to others. And you've definitely inspired me as well with our conversation.
Thank you. I'm glad. I have quite a few freebies on my website, so I welcome people to go and check it out. I definitely have this set, how to write a book that sells in 7 simple steps. And that is an ebook that is available for free. I would love to get that into the hands of your viewers, because a lot of times just telling your story, writing your story can be a little overwhelming, but it's a part of the process that we want to help you get through.
So I was really excited to have this conversation with Lisa. I really like how she talks about that we are who we are today because of our past. And even though it may not have to define us in a negative way, we can use that, need it, move it to help propel us in the future and also bring others along the way. So if this podcast was beneficial for you, I would absolutely enjoy it and invite you to share it with those that you feel would be benefiting from it. Also, put a review on there. It does so much for the podcast. And until next time, let's keep building one another up.